Have you ever walked into a place and feel like you've stepped into someone else's nightmare? Like the air itself is holding its breath, waiting for you to make a wrong move? That's what I felt at Camp Clearwater, upstate New York, summer of 1999. I was 14, a city kid with a chipped front tooth and a knack for getting into trouble. My parents thought 2 weeks at camp would straighten me out, teach me to make friends, maybe stop sneaking out at night. Clearwater was old, with sagging cabins and a lake so still it looked like glass. The brochure promised adventure, hiking, swimming, campfires under 1,000,000 stars. But the moment I arrived, something felt off, like the forest was watching, waiting. I ignored it. Just a camp, right? It's a chance to escape my parents' nagging. What could go wrong? I was so wrong it hurts to think about. We rolled into camp on a dusty bus, the air heavy with the smell of pine and damp earth. Clearwater was a sprawl of weathered cabins, their paint peeling like old skin, surrounded by woods so thick they seemed to swallow the sunlight. My cabin, Birch Lodge, was a creaky box with bunk beds that groaned under our weight. The other kids were a mixed city brats like me, rural kids who knew every tree by name, and a few quiet ones who kept to themselves. The counselors were young, barely out of college, more interested in sneaking smokes behind the mess hall than watching us. It felt like freedom, like we could get away with anything. The first night, we gathered around a crackling campfire, the flames casting long shadows across our faces. The head counselor, Mike, a guy with a scruffy beard and a crooked grin, spun Ghost's ultimatum, ghost stories to keep us in line. He told us about Cabin 13, a crumbling shack hidden deep in the woods, abandoned after a fire in the 1960s. The story went that a group of campers died in the blaze. Kids just like us, and their spirits never left. Don't go looking for it, Mike said, his voice low, eyes glinting in the firelight. The woods don't like visitors, he laughed, thinking it was just a tale to scare us into staying in our bunks. The kids around me were eating it up, whispering about ghosts and giggling nervously. I rolled my eyes but felt a shiver crawl up my spine. The first few days were a blur of fun. We swam in the lake, played capture the flag, and raided the kitchen for extra snacks. I hit it off with Jake, a wiry kid with a gap-toothed grin and a knack for daring people into stupid stunts. The kind of friend who'd push you to do something dumb just to see if you'd try. By day 5, we were bored with the routine, hikes, crafts, the same old campfire songs. "Let's find Cabin 13, Jake said one afternoon, his eyes gleaming with mischief. I wasn't sold. The woods were creepy enough without chasing ghost stories, but Jake called me a chicken, and that was that. No way was I backing down. We grabbed a flashlight and a half-eaten bag of chips and slipped into the forest during free time, following a faint trail that seemed to lead nowhere. The woods were thicker than I expected, the trees pressing in close, their branches tangling overhead like a cage. The air was heavy, smelling of moss and decay, and the deeper we went, the quieter it got. No birds, no wind, just our sneakers crunching on pine needles. My gut was screaming at me to turn back, but Jake kept pushing forward, his laughter echoing in the stillness. "You scared?" he teased, tossing a chip at me. I caught it, forced a grin, and kept going. After what felt like hours, we saw it, a crumbling cabin, half swallowed by vines, its windows dark and empty like hollow eyes. The door hung off its hinges, swaying slightly, though there was no breeze. "This is it," Jake whispered, his grin fading. The air felt wrong, heavy, like it was pressing against my chest. We stepped inside, the floorboards creaking under our weight. The air was stale, thick with the smell of rot and ash. Old bunk, beds lined the walls, their mattresses sagging and moldy, and a blackened fireplace sat in the corner, its stones stained with soot. On one wall, someone had scratched words into the wood, "They're still here." My skin prickled, a cold sweat breaking out on my neck. Jake laughed, but it was shaky, like he was trying to convince himself it was no big deal. I wanted to leave, but my feet felt glued to the floor, my flashlight beam trembling as it swept the room. Then we heard it, a low, rhythmic thumping, like someone knocking on the walls. It came from everywhere, slow at first, then faster, louder, like a heartbeat racing out of control. Jake grabbed my arm, his nails digging into my skin. "What the hell is that?" he hissed. I didn't know, but my heart was pounding so hard I thought it'd burst. "We gotta go," I said, my voice barely a whisper. But before we could move, the door slammed shut. No wind, no hands, just a loud, deliberate bang that echoed in my bones. I yanked at the handle, but it wouldn't budge, like something was holding it closed. The thumping grew frantic, vibrating through the floor, and then another sound joined it, a child's voice, singing softly. the words too muffled to make out but sharp enough to cut through me. We pounded on the door, screaming until our throats burned. The singing grew louder, closer, circling us like a predator. I turned, my flashlight shaking, and saw them, shadows in the corners, small and human-shaped, flickering like smoke. They didn't move like people. They glided, their edges blurry, their faces wrong, too pale, too still, with eyes that weren't eyes at all, just dark, endless voids. Jake was crying now, his tough guy act gone, and I wasn't far behind. I kept pulling at the door, my hands slipping with sweat, but it held fast. The singing turned into a hum, low and wordless, filling the cabin until I could feel it in my teeth. I don't know how long we were trapped. Minutes, hours? My sense of time melted away, replaced by raw panic. The shadows moved closer, their shapes shifting, stretching like they were reaching for us. I could smell them, ash and something sour, like fear turned solid. Jake was sobbing, muttering apologies to no one, and I was screaming at the door, my fists bruised and bleeding. Then, just as suddenly as it started, the door creaked open. The thumping stopped, the singing faded, and the shadows vanished. We ran, not stopping, until we stumbled into the main camp, gasping and shaking. Mike was waiting, his face a mix of fury and fear. "Where were you?" he yelled. But when we told him about Cabin 13, he went pale. "You're lucky you made it back," he said, his voice low. He wouldn't say more, but I overheard him later, whispering to another counselor about how Cabin 13 wasn't on any camp maps anymore. It had been boarded up after the fire, but kids kept finding it. Not all of them came back. Jake and I never talked about it after that summer. We swore we wouldn't, like saying it out loud would make it real again. The camp closed a few years later, the land sold off to some developer who probably didn't know what they were buying. I tried to forget to shove it down deep, but it's still there, clawing at me. I can't walk past a forest without feeling those shadows watching, hearing that muffled singing in the back of my mind. Sometimes when I'm alone, I catch a glimpse of movement in the corner of my eye, a flicker of something small, something wrong. I moved across the country, far from those woods, but it didn't matter. You're still here. I dream about that cabin almost every night. The door slamming shut, the thumping, the singing, those gliding shadows. I wake up screaming, my heart racing, my hands reaching for a door that isn't there. If you ever find yourself near Clearwater, stay on the trails. Don't go looking for Cabin 13. The woods don't just hide secrets, they keep them. It was the summer of 2010, and I was 17, a junior counselor in Oregon's mountains, trying to save up for a beat-up car to call my own. Blue Lake was a postcard come to life. Crystal clear water, pine-covered hills, air so clean it burned your lungs in the best way. The camp was all about water activities, canoeing, swimming, diving off rickety docks. I was in charge of the lake, teaching kids to paddle and lifeguarding during swim time. It was hard work, but I loved it. The sun on my skin, the kids' laughter, the way the lake sparkled like it was daring you to jump in. But there was one rule, drilled into us from day one. No swimming after dark. I thought it was just about safety. I mean, who wants a kid drowning on their watch? But the way the counselors said it, the way their eyes darted to the water, it felt like more. I was so wrong. We arrived at Camp Blue Lake on a bright June morning, the kind that makes you forget the world can be cruel. The camp was a sprawl of wooden cabins, their roofs mossy from years of rain, circling a lake so still it mirrored the sky. My group was a dozen kids, ages 10 to 13, all buzzing with energy, ready to cannonball into the water or race kayaks across the lake. Our cabin, Lakeview, was closest to the shore, the water lapping just yards from our door. At night, the lake was quiet, almost too quiet, like it was holding its breath. The kids loved it, splashing all day, their voices echoing off the mountains. I was the cool counselor, the one who'd let them sneak an extra swim if they didn't tell Ms. Carter. The head counselor with a stare that could freeze you solid. The first week was perfect. We'd paddle out to the middle of the lake, the kids shrieking as they tipped each other's canoes, then dry off by the campfire, telling dumb jokes and eating burnt marshmallows. But I noticed something odd early on. The older counselors, guys like Tom, who'd been at Blue Lake for years, never swam in the lake. They'd watch from the dock, their faces tight, like they were waiting for something to go wrong. When I asked Tom about it, he just shrugged. "Lake's tricky," he said, his voice low. "Stick to daylight." Figured he was just paranoid, maybe worried about liability. But Miss Carter's rule about no night swimming stuck with me. "The lake's not safe after dark," she'd say, her voice sharp, her eyes flicking to the water like it might hear her. By the second week, the the kids started getting restless. They'd heard the rumors, campfire whispers about the lake, about things that moved under the water when the moon was high. One night, around day 8, I overheard a group of boys plotting a midnight swim. Liam, Nate, and Connor. 3 troublemakers who'd already been caught sneaking cookies from the mess hall were giggling in their bunks, planning to sneak out. I was supposed to be asleep, but their whispers carried. "It's just a stupid rule," Liam said, his voice full of bravado. "Bet we see something cool." I should have stopped them, but I was exhausted, my eyes heavy from long days on the water. I figured they'd chicken out. They didn't. I woke to the sound of the cabin door creaking shut. It was past midnight, the air cool and damp. I grabbed my flashlight and a hoodie, cursing under my breath as I slipped outside. The camp was silent, the other cabins dark, the only sound the soft lapping of the lake. I reached the shore just as the boys hit the water, their laughter cutting through the night. They were splashing, dunking each other, their silhouettes black against the moonlit lake. "Get out," I hissed, keeping my voice low so I wouldn't wake the whole camp. They ignored me, Nate splashing Liam with a grin. I was about to wade in and drag them out when I noticed something wrong. The lake was too still. No ripples, no waves, just a glassy surface that didn't move, even with the boys thrashing around. It was like the water was swallowing their motion, refusing to react. Then Liam screamed. It wasn't a playful scream, it was raw, guttural. The kind of sound you make when you're sure you're going to die. He thrashed in the water, his arms flailing, his voice cracking. "Something's got me," he yelled. "It's pulling me down." Nate and Connor froze, their faces pale, their eyes wide with terror. I ran to the edge, shouting for them to swim back. Liam was sobbing now, saying it felt like hands, cold, strong hands, gripping his legs, tugging him under. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. I didn't think I jumped in, the water hitting me like a slap so cold it stole my breath. It felt wrong, heavy, like it was fighting me, pushing me back as I swam toward Liam. I reached him, grabbed his arm, and pulled. For a moment it felt like something was pulling back, something stronger than me. Something that didn't want to let go. The water was alive, tightening around us, and I swear I felt fingers, icy skeletal brush against my ankle. I kicked harder, screaming at Liam to swim, and whatever it was, released him. We scrambled to shore, Nate and Connor right behind us, their breaths coming in sharp gasps. Liam collapsed on the sand, sobbing, his legs covered in red welts, like fingerprints burned into his skin. They weren't bruises, they were too precise, too deliberate, like something had marked him. We didn't talk about it. The boys swore they wouldn't tell, and I didn't want to lose my job. I marched them back to the cabin, my hands shaking, my mind racing. The next morning, I couldn't look at the lake without feeling sick. It looked the same, sparkling, inviting, but now I saw it for what it was, a trap, hiding something hungry. During a break, I slipped into the lifeguard shack to grab some towels and found something tucked behind a pile of life jackets, an old Polaroid, faded and creased. It showed a group of campers from the 1970s, smiling by the lake, their faces carefree. But in the background, just under the water's surface, was a shape. It looked like a face, pale, distorted, with eyes too big, too dark, staring up at the camera. My stomach dropped. I showed it to Miss Carter later, my voice shaking as I asked what it was. She didn't want to talk, but I pressed, and finally, she cracked. "The lake has a history," she said, her hands trembling as she lit a cigarette. "In the 70s, a counselor named Ellen drowned during a storm. They never found her body, but kids started seeing her under the water, reaching up, her face pale and wrong. Miss Carter said it was just a story, but her eyes told a different truth. She made me promise not to tell the kids, said it'd scare them too much. Liam's family pulled him from camp the next day. His welts didn't fade for weeks, his mom told me later, and he refused to go near water after that. I finished the summer, but I stayed away from the lake at night, sticking to the docks, my flashlight always on. The other counselors stopped joking about the rule, their faces tight whenever the water came up in conversation. The camp ran for a few more years before it shut down, the lake deemed unsafe for reasons nobody explained. I moved away after that summer, but the lake follows me. I can't swim anymore, not in pools, not in rivers, not even in a bathtub, without feeling those cold hands brushing my legs, waiting to pull me under. Sometimes when I close my eyes, see that face from the Polaroid, staring up through the water, her mouth open like she's calling my name. If you ever find yourself at a lake that's too still, too perfect, do yourself a favor. Don't go in. Not at night. Not ever. Have you ever feel eyes on you when you're alone? Like someone's staring from just out of sight? Not a person, not an animal, but something that makes your skin crawl and your heart race for no reason you can name. That's what I felt at Camp Red Oak, Tennessee, in the summer of 2003. I was 15, a shy kid who'd rather sketch in a notebook than talk to people. My parents sent me to camp to bring me out of my shell, thinking 2 weeks of hiking and campfire songs would fix me. Red Oak was rustic, no electricity, just lanterns and outhouses. Set in a valley where the hills were blanketed with wildflowers, and the woods stretched on forever. It sounded like a dream, a chance to draw trees and maybe make a friend or two. But from the moment I arrived, I felt it, that heavy, watched feeling, like the forest itself had eyes. I ignored it, just nerves, right? A new place, new people, could go wrong. Was wrong in ways I still can't fully explain. We got to Camp Red Oak on a muggy June afternoon, the air thick with the scent of honeysuckle and damp earth. Camp was a scatter of wooden cabins, their logs weathered gray, surrounded by trails that snaked into the woods. My cabin, Oak Ridge, was a creaky shack with bunk beds that smelled of mildew and a single lantern that flickered like it was fighting. To stay lit, the other kids were loud. Some were jocks, some were wannabe rebels. A few like me just kept their heads down. The counselors were barely older than us, more interested in flirting with each other than watching a bunch of teenagers. It felt like a place where you could slip through the cracks, and I liked that. I'd spend my days sketching my pencil, scratching out the shapes of trees and hills, while the others played volleyball or swam in the creek. The first few days were fine, if lonely. I'd hike with my group, keeping to the back, my sketchbook tucked under my arm, but I couldn't shake that watched feeling. On trails, I'd catch glimpses of movement in the trees, a flash of white like fabric or a shadow that moved too fast to be human. It was subtle at first, easy to dismiss as a deer or my imagination. But by day 4, it was constant. I'd look up from my sketches and feel it, eyes boring into me, heavy and unblinking. My drawings started changing too. I'd meant to sketch the wildflowers, the winding paths, but instead, I was drawing eyes, dozens of them, staring out from the trees, their pupils dark and endless. I'd rip the pages out, stuff them in my bag, but the next day I'd draw them again, like my hands had a mind of their own. One night during a campfire, I overheard the counselors talking about the Watcher. They were huddled by the mess hall, passing a flask, their voices low. The story went that long before the camp was built. A man lived in these woods, a recluse, maybe a hermit, who'd watched the settlers from the shadows. Never spoke, never approached, just stared, his eyes like holes that swallowed light. Red Oak opened in the 50s. Kids started seeing him too. Tall figure in a tattered white shirt, always at a distance, always watching. The counselors laughed it off, saying it was just a legend to keep us from sneaking out, but their eyes darted to the woods and they never strayed far from the fire. I didn't laugh. That watched feeling was stronger than ever, and my sketchbook was filling with those eyes. By the second week, I was a wreck. I wasn't sleeping. The feeling of being watched followed me into the cabin, into my dreams. Wake up gasping, my heart racing. Sure, I'd seen something at the window. The other kids noticed, whispering that I was weird, but I didn't care. I just wanted to prove it was nothing, to shake off the fear that was eating me alive. So, one afternoon, during a solo hike, stupid, I know, I wandered off the trail. I told myself I was facing it, proving there was no watcher, no ghost, just my dumb brain playing tricks. I took a narrow path that led deeper into the woods, my sketchbook under one arm, stick in my hand like it could protect me. The forest was quiet. It's too quiet, the kind of silence that presses against your ears. The trees were denser here, their branches knitting together to block the sun. I walked for maybe 20 minutes, my sneakers crunching on leaves when I saw him. He was standing between two oaks, about 50 yards away, tall and thin, dressed in a tattered white shirt that hung off him like it was too big. His head was tilted, his face shadowed, but I could feel his stare, heavy and wrong, like it was pulling me apart. My heart stopped. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe, just stood there, my stick falling from my hand. He took a step forward and I ran. I didn't look back, didn't stop, my legs burning as I crashed through the underbrush. Branches clawed at my arms, my sketchbook slipped from my grip, but I didn't care. I just ran, my breath ragged, my mind screaming. Stumbled into camp, gasping, my shirt torn, my hands scratched and bleeding. The counselors chewed me out for wandering off, but I didn't tell them what I saw. How could I? They'd think I was crazy. But that night I heard it, scratching outside the cabin, slow and deliberate, like nails dragging across wood. I peered through the window, my breath fogging the glass, and there he was, the Watcher. Standing at the edge of the clearing, his head tilted the same way, his white shirt glowing in the moonlight. I ducked under my blanket, my heart pounding, praying he'd go away. The scratching stopped, but the feeling don't. The next day I went back for my sketchbook. I don't know why. Maybe I thought it would prove I wasn't losing it. I found it in the woods, lying open on the ground, but the pages were wrong. My drawings of trees and hills were gone, replaced with eyes, hundreds of them, scratched into the paper with something sharp like a knife. I burned the sketchbook that night, watching the pages curl into ash, but it didn't help. The feeling followed me, stronger now, like the watcher was closer, the stare heavier. The camp ended a few days later, and I went home, but it wasn't over. A year later, I was hiking near my house, a different forest, miles from Red Oak. I felt it again, that same watched feeling like a weight on my chest. I looked up and there he was, standing in the distance, his white shirt glowing in the dusk, his head tilted, staring. I moved away after that, to a city with no trees, no woods, but it didn't matter. He's still there, in the corner of my eye, in the quiet moments when I'm alone. I can't draw anymore. Every time I pick up a pencil, my hand starts sketching eyes. Those same dark, endless eyes. I dream about him too, standing in the woods watching, his face never clear but always there. Sometimes I hear the scratching, faint but deliberate, like he's trying to get in. Camp Red Oak is still out there, still running, but I'd never go back. If you find yourself in those Tennessee woods, stick to the trails. Don't look too long at the shadows. The watcher doesn't just watch, he follows. It was the summer of 2014 and I was 18, a violinist counting down my last summer as a camper before college. Starlight tucked away in the misty woods of Maine. It was a music camp for kids who lived for their instruments, violins, flutes, guitars, you name it. The camp was old, with sagging cabins and a stone chapel where we'd practice for the Big and Dove summer concert. The chapel's stained glass windows glowed like jewels in the daylight, but at night they cast shadows that seemed to twist and crawl. I thought I'd spend my days playing music and my nights jamming by the lake, but from the moment I arrived, I felt it. A hum, not from instruments, but from something deeper, something wrong. I ignored it. Just a camp, right? My heart out. What could go wrong? It was so wrong. It still haunts me. We rolled into Camp Starlight on a foggy June morning, air cool and damp, smelling of pine and wet stone. The camp was a cluster of cabins circling a lake that shimmered under the clouds, with the chapel looming at the far end like a sentinel. My cabin harmony was a creaky box with bunk beds and a single window that rattled in the wind. The other campers were music nerds like me, kids who'd rather practice scales than play sports, their fingers calloused from strings and keys. The counselors were young musicians, passionate but distracted, more focused on perfecting our concert pieces than babysitting us. It felt like a haven, a place where I could lose myself in my violin, the notes carrying me away from the real world. The first week was magic. We'd rehearse all day, the chapel filled with the sound of violins and clarinets weaving together, then sneak to the lake at night for impromptu jam sessions. I'd play until my fingers ached, the music blending with the crickets and the lapping water, but by day 5, I started hearing something else. Late at night as I walked back to the cabin, I'd catch it, a faint, wordless singing, like a choir warming up, drifting from the chapel. It was soft, almost beautiful, but it sent a shiver down my spine. I'd stop, strained to listen, but it would fade, leaving only the rustle of leaves. I asked the other campers if they heard it, but they just shrugged, saying I was imagining things. Too many late nights, my bunkmate, Clara, teased, her flute case tucked under her arm. But I wasn't so sure. The sound grew stronger each night, clearer, like it was calling me. By the second week, I couldn't ignore it. It wasn't just singing, it was a hum, low and endless, weaving through the trees, following me back to the cabin. I'd lie awake, my violin case clutched like a shield, listening as the hum crept closer, seeping through the walls. The other campers didn't hear it, but I saw it in their eyes. They were sleeping less, they were playing off, their hands shaking during rehearsals. Even the counselors seemed on edge, snapping at us for missed notes, their eyes darting to the chapel when they thought we weren't looking. One night, around day 10, I couldn't take it anymore. The hum was louder, almost deafening. A chorus. Of voices with no words, no melody, just a relentless drone that made my teeth ache. I grabbed my flashlight and slipped out of the cabin, heading for the chapel. The air was cold, the kind that seeps into your bones, and the fog was so thick I could barely see 10 feet ahead. The chapel loomed out of the mist, its stained glass, windows dark, the stone walls slick with damp. I pushed open the heavy door, the creak echoing in the empty space. The pews were silent, the organ untouched, but the hum was everywhere, vibrating through the floor, the walls, my skin. I climbed the stairs to the choir loft, my flashlight shaking in my hand. The hum was louder here, pressing against my eardrums. But the loft was empty, no singers, no instruments, just dust and shadows. I stood there, frozen, as the voices grew clearer, overlapping, 100 whispers braided into one. My heart was pounding, my breath shallow, but I couldn't move. Then I saw it, a flicker in the corner, a shape that wasn't quite human, too tall, too thin, its edges blurry like smoke. It didn't move, didn't speak, just stood there, its head tilted like it was listening. I ran, my sneakers slapping the stone, not stopping until I was back in the cabin, my chest heaving, the hum still ringing in my ears. I told my counselor Emily the next morning, my voice shaking as I described the singing, the shape. She didn't laugh, didn't brush it off. Her face went pale, and she grabbed my arm, pulling me outside. "Don't go back there," she said, her voice low.
At night.
I pressed her for answers, and after a long pause, she told me the chapel was built on an old burial ground. Unmarked graves from a settlement that vanished in the 1800s. Kids had heard voices for years. She said singing that wasn't there, shadows that moved on their own. It's just stories, she added. But her hands were trembling and she wouldn't meet my eyes. The hum didn't stop. It followed me everywhere. Rehearsals, meals, even the lake. The other campers started acting strange. Their eyes glassy, their voices quiet, like they were listening to something I couldn't hear. One night I woke to find Clara and 2 other girls standing around my bunk, their faces blank, their mouths moving in unison, humming that same wordless tune. No sound came out, but I could feel it vibrating in my chest, my head, my bones. I screamed and they blinked, confused like they'd been sleepwalking. "What's wrong with you?" Clara muttered, rubbing her eyes. But I saw the fear in her face. The next night it was worse. I was alone in the cabin, the others at a late rehearsal. When the hum started again, louder, closer, I think it was inside the walls. I grabbed my violin, thinking the music might drown it out, but my hands were shaking too hard to play. Then I heard footsteps, slow, deliberate, circling the cabin. I looked out the window and there they were, shapes in the fog, too many to count, their forms flickering like candle flames. They didn't have faces, just dark, hollow spaces where eyes should have been, their mouths open, humming. I locked the door, shoved my bunk against it, and hid under my blanket, praying it would stop. The footsteps kept circling, the hum growing, until it felt like it would split my skull. The camp shut down early the next day. The official reason was a water main break, but we knew it was a lie. The counselors were pale, whispering among themselves, and the campers were sent home without a concert. I burned my sheet music when I got home, the notes tainted by that hum. I quit the violin, sold my instrument, but it didn't matter. The hum followed me. It's faint now, but it's there when I'm alone, when it's quiet, creeping into the edges of my mind. Sometimes I wake up to find myself humming, my mouth moving without my permission, the same wordless tune from the chapel. I've never gone back to Starlight. The camp's still there, still running, but I hear the stories, new campers, new voices, the same hum. If you ever find yourself in those Maine woods, stay away from the chapel. Don't listen too closely at night. The choir doesn't just sing, it claims.